Hey, Jed, good to see you.
Hey Andy, how you doing? How's your summer been?
Mine's been good. I'll tell you about it. But start with you. What have you been up to since we were last together? It's been a minute,
Well, I haven't
as
had
the
much of a
kids say.
well, I haven't had as much summer in terms of vacation. I'm saving things up. It's my wife's on my 25th, and we're walking the Camino in Spain in the second half of September and October. So I basically been working straight through the summer. But most of the other time that I've had has been around my son and helping him with his college applications and trying to get in front of a college coach for his soccer team. Also trying to help a lot of his teammates who are similarly in the recruiting process. I know we want to keep it light and talk about the fun of summer, right? But this soccer recruiting and D3 sports and the gentrification of college athletics is something I'm experiencing up close and personal right now. But I guess the positive thing is a lot of Quentin's soccer friends, several of whom are first generation, are actually going to end up going to good schools in the end. And so we feel terrific about that.
Yeah, that's great. And they all end up like, going to good schools. I think athletics can end up taking on like an outsized importance. We should maybe at some point do a Steve Messler and I did one with Michael Horn, a podcast. We talked about that. We can put that in the show notes. And we were talking about coming back with our daughters. All of us have, and Steve's daughter's younger. My daughters have both played competitive sports, and just like it's a lot for sure. Maybe we could do something on that. But tell me about so you're going to walk the way. Where are you going to start, and how far are you going to go?
So we're going to start in Saint Jean in France, and we'll go across the French French Pyrenees there and do the entire distance. So we did a third of it 8 years ago when I was on sabbatical, and our little ones, our 10 and our 12-year-old were with us at the time. But when we got to the end, Amy and I said, hey, let's come back for our 25th and do the entire thing. So it's been this thing that's been an anchor there for a long time. We really have a good time. I don't know if you've done any part of the Camino or know very much about it, but it's getting to be super popular. It's overrun with tourists, but it's also quite a cool experience. And we're really looking forward to it.
Yeah, we have friends who've done it. I mean, a lot of what I know about it honestly comes from that fantastic Emilio Estevez, Martin Sheen film. But yeah, I know a little bit, and I had a similar experience. I would say sort of a far more perhaps more secular experience. We were in Rome. We were riding our bikes on the Appian Way, and I didn't realize you can actually just sort of self-deploy and ride the whole thing if you want, with a mountain bike, suspended kind of bike. And so now I'm like trying to figure out how far we could take it and ride into Rome. And so that's now becoming, I have another Europe ride I want to do, and now that's on the list.
So was that the first time for the family in Rome?
It was first time as a family for us to be in Italy together. Yes, we were in Rome, Florence, and Tuscany. So, some history, a lot of food and wine, and some good time outside, just some good time together. We're at a similar, point. My kids are 17, so we're, trying to remind them that their parents are okay. So maybe they'll come back one day.
Last summer, we were trying to pitch an idea for a trip together as a family, and I pitched all these different things. Let's go camping. Let's go to Canada. Let's go. And everyone was like, why don't you and mom get some good quality time together? And then I pitched Rome, and they're like, oh, let's do a family vacation, right?
So and Rome's great. It's a fun city. You can both have fun. The learning opportunities there. You could, you could spend a decade there and not get through so much. So it's a cool place. I was intrigued. Like we spent a bunch of time in Alaska last summer, which was amazing. And saw just a terrific education person up there, Jamie Reese. He's a high school teacher in Seattle. He used to teach in Baltimore. Fantastic. He was a college athlete, played soccer for Harvard, and just one of those really interesting people in our sector. And spent some time with him up around Fairbanks. It was a great trip. And I wasn't sure that the kids like really love it, or was it like nice, they're glad to be home. And interestingly, like when we're starting to work on the Italy trip, one of my daughters was like, I wish we could just like go back to Alaska and be outside in Alaska again. I was kind of like, okay, that's like not this summer, but that's cool. We will definitely, I've been lucky enough to be up there a few times, and we will definitely do that again.
Yeah, so we have kindred spirits in all sorts of ways. We did a trip in Alaska, and that is the kids' favorite by far. They would go back to Alaska in a heartbeat.
Yeah, it's an amazing place. It opens, like Rome opens your, and I think for my kids, like, that was they'd seen old stuff, but they hadn't seen, like, they think, like, I mean, they've been, like, they've been nice and they've seen Viking stuff, things like that. But like, I think that kind of blew their minds. And I think Alaska blows your mind so geographically, just how big country can actually be.
Yeah,
And just how
absolutely.
remote and how you can just get out in the bush and be gone. So I think you need things like that when you're young. It kind of changes it opens your horizons. Well, what my girls, I'll tell you the truth, what they really wanted this summer, because they're 17, they thought this was going to be sort of hot girl summer. And in fact, what we basically did, in addition to dragging to Italy, we dragged them to a lot of concerts. And so, like, I'm telling them what they got was they got lot girl summer. So they saw one of my daughters and I saw a great Neil Young show. I don't know if you and I talked about that. It was
No.
a fantastic Neil Young show at the Greek
Wow.
right at the beginning of summer. And then they saw Dead and Company, and
Oh, good.
yeah, which was their first time in that
Wow.
scene. So that was interesting. And Julie and I caught Tedeschi Trucks, and actually just last night we're doing this on a we're doing this on a Thursday, and it'll go up in a day or two. We saw Bill Kreutzmann's doing a tour with his band, just a two show tour. They're calling it Peer to Peer. So he's playing the Pier in Baltimore and a Pier up in New York, and they were exceptional. He's got just a really good configuration. This woman Kamika Moore came by and was set in on vocals, and she was amazing. He's got this new guy Danny Donato's sort of a real creative player. So that was super fun. And so that it's been more lot girl summer than anything else.
Well, the amazing thing is you've got your kids willing to go to concerts with you. That's a bridge I've never gotten over, and I don't think I ever will. But
okay, we can make this whole episode. We can name check interesting people. A few years ago, Paul Herdman used to tell me, from Rodell in Delaware and formerly New America Schools, and came up in Outward Bound. Paul's just a terrific person in the sector, lives in Delaware, and Paul used to tell me about going to concerts with his daughter, and I was like so sort of jealous, and I was like, oh my god, that's so cool, like not bad jealousy, but just, oh my gosh, that sounds so great. But I was like, I don't know if that'll ever. And then, like, it just sort of started happening, and it's been cool. We're gonna go catch some Bruce shows hopefully this fall. It's been interesting, but it just sort of happened, and it was something I watched other people do, and I was like, how do you make that happen? And I don't think you can. It just has to sort of happen organically.
well, maybe my kids want to stay separate from me on recreational time because of things related to charter school obsession. For example, when we were in Alaska, I found out that there is a charter school in a place called North Pole. It's called North Pole Charter School. And so we're driving into North Pole, and the kids, where do they want to go? Santa's workshop. And I was like, shut up. We're going to the charter school first, right?
Yeah.
So they wanted to go in a different direction there as far as charter schools go. And I think their tastes in music have stayed similarly.
We were going to visit, that COVID got in the way. Laura Marcus, who ran the Arrête Project, now runs Tide Lines, which is a really cool school in Gustavus, Alaska for college students. And she there's a school out your way called Deep Springs, and she wanted to start an all-female version. I ended up doing this co-ed thing in Alaska. Another, so we're going to keep name checking, just a really interesting person in the sector, kind of does things her own way. Actually just had a baby. She's just fantastic as an educator. And I was making, my kids are like, we're in Glacier Bay, and like at the Park Service's sort of incredible lodge up there in Bartlett Cove, and we're hanging out, and Dad wants to make us go to a school. And so we're looking at whales, and they're like, yeah, we're going to go to a school. They get that.
Well, I did enjoy getting a couple texts from you while you were in Rome. Thank you for allowing your vacation to be interrupted. But there were several occasions, over the last month or so, because it's been a while since we've done a recording, where Virginia stuff has come up that I've wanted to talk.
Yeah, we should at some point. We should. This isn't just who wants to listen to a podcast. Jen and I are going to talk about our vacations and our families, and then get weepy about being empty nesters. That'll be great for the ratings. Yes, we should pivot. We can talk about that. Before we do that, I do want to our next. So we sort of have been bullshitting a little bit, but our next, and we'll get into Virginia. That stuff's more serious. But our next podcast at the end of the month, we have two really amazing guests. It went well with Mackie as one guest, so we figured why not do two. I'm not going to say who they are, but I think it's going to be a really fantastic discussion about sort of education, politics, advocacy, parent organizing and empowerment. And I'm just super excited about it. So that one, I would say tune in, but obviously it's a podcast. So you can listen whenever you want, but that'll be the next one. And I'm just super looking forward to that.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it as well. And how this work is done authentically. There's times when you see folks brought into advocacy efforts and it feels real, and there are others that it just doesn't. And I think the two people that we're going to have on in a couple of weeks, are really among those people that specialize in the authentic voice, right?
And we'll just, we've been name checking people. We'll just name that there are two mystery guests who you will you will find out about soon. Hey, this reminds me one more thing before we get to Virginia. Yeah. Do you know Steve Reese, Schoolwise Press? That he does school data journal.
Yeah, I know him.
He's another one of these people who I was thinking, I saw Steve recently. I was thinking about him, he came up in like Palo Alto, and like, if you go to like that, they did that big Bill Graham, the music producer, Bill Graham, not Billy Graham, the evangelist, sure. the other Billy Graham, the music producer. And like Steve's pictures were in that exhibit. He's got like, his work was used in like the Grateful Dead movie, and he's got all these pictures. He gave me some pictures once, and they're of like Jerry Garcia, like, in like Palo Alto at these little places in the early 60s. and one day he sent me a Warlocks poster. He's like he's another one of these people who like, you think you sort of know, like, a little bit, and then like underneath there's like all this other stuff, And I was thinking about that the other day. It's like, Shivam Shah, like, who everybody thinks of, education executive, but like she also owns a tequila company, which is not probably what you would necessarily, or, Becca Bracey's like, really serious in the mountains, mountain biker and climber. Like, we get these people who are, it's just interesting. And we, maybe one day we could do like some sort of thing on that, because they're the kind of people who surprise you. You learn a couple of things about them, and you can't predict the other ones because there's all this stuff out of left field.
I'll leave it to Rothram to get me to break one of my solemn vows, because one has been never to discuss anything that I've done relative to the Grateful Dead in a professional setting. Because believe me, what happened at Grateful Dead shows needs to stay in Grateful Dead shows. But I love the tour of all the people and the stuff that you saw this summer. And there's
okay. Well, now I'm going to make you break your vow. Did you go to the shows out there? Some shows out there this summer?
No, I didn't go this year. And I did have a very close friend that was going to Boulder and for one of the last shows with his daughter, and really wanted me to be there. And I just could not make it happen with other family stuff that I had going on. But
scheduling's tough. That does happen. I'm a little more porous on that rule. I remember I took a couple of people from my team. When I'm out in California, it's unfortunately closed, but Phil Lush had that great club over in Marin that was just such a delightful place to spend time. And I would drag them over there. I remember I took a couple of them over there one time. Phil was playing, and with Phil Lush and friends like Stu Allen and like some really good players. And and it was like, you do have to kind of have the rule. Hey, you do whatever you want, and like.
And it will stay here. All right. Well, let's pivot to Virginia. The way I've been thinking about this is we've got a country that has about 50 hot steaming messes from a state policy standpoint. It just seems like, and they're all crazy for their own unique ways, but they are crazy at a level of craziness that is pretty unprecedented. And then you see Rick Hess write an article that quotes you and really dives deep into Virginia adopting some state content standards that seem genuinely like really great ones. And so something substantive was able to get done in Virginia. And then I've done a few other, I just continue to read articles. There are some that come up that just stress the culture wars and all that stuff. But there's also this reasonability that's there. Some of the appointments to the state board, not just yourself, but Michelle and others, suggest that maybe there's something that we should be learning from in Virginia. So I wonder if you wouldn't mind just like setting the stage for us. Can you?
Sure, and we'll put that in the show notes. It was actually an interview. Rick pulled a little bit of like a Tom Sawyer move. So it was actually an interview. So I did all the work, but he gets the byline, and But like Rick is of course prolific. Like since then he's probably written like 2 books on Virginia since that interview. So that was back in like April. But we'll put that in the show notes. Look, I don't know how to set the stage. I guess the big thing I would say about Virginia, and this has always been true, I think, just in public life and politics and so forth. Like, there's always like the narrative that people, and these days, whatever people are saying on Twitter or X or whatever the hell we're calling it now, and in social media, and even in some cases, like in the regular legacy media. And then there's what's actually happening and what's actually going on. And those two things are often like there's some variance. I think what's really pronounced now is in some cases just how substantial the variance is.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's unique at all to Virginia. I think you see that, around the country. And again, you always have. I just think it's a little bit more intense now. So I don't want to say like everything in Virginia is going swimmingly. We have intense partisanship. It's going to heat up. There's an election coming and all that. But like the point of Rick's, the interview was like, we did get something done on these standards. Everybody who reads them thinks they're pretty good. And I think it shows just like you can get things done. And the thing about it, I don't think any one person deserves credit for it. It was a bunch of people working together and essentially just putting the interests of the Commonwealth and the kids of the Commonwealth ahead of like all the temporal, expediency.
So as far as additional context, I always go back to the election in 21, and it was seen as really a swing election where education proved to be the difference maker. And McAuliffe had Randy Weingarten come at the last second, and the thought was that maybe Weingarten would help. And the perception of at least pundits in the end was that that was exactly the wrong thing to do. Governor talked about that we shouldn't be entrusting parents with, I don't remember exactly what the quote was, but a very radioactive comment about not trusting parents to operate our school districts or something like that. And Youngkin wins. And when he wins, when he makes his celebratory speech that first night, the word charter was the 60th word he uttered. We were going to get a charter school law done in Virginia.
Only you counted that. I like that.
Oh yeah. Well,
you probably tell me how many syllables in it.
But what I liked about it was though that it signaled, I think, seriousness. I was hoping that, and I think there was a very serious effort that was made. Ultimately, a charter school law was not able to get across the finish line. This lab school concept was. And I think a lot of drama and conflict happened in those first early months. And then people stopped paying attention as much again. And I think it was after, that happened where perhaps some of, these other substantive progress, examples of progress were able to happen.
Yeah. Okay. So a lot there. I mean, let's start with like the political analysis. Education was obviously a factor in the race. So was voters turned out in certain parts of the state who hadn't turned out and so forth. I think one way you can see, if you look at places like Loudoun County and Fairfax County, which stayed closed for a long time, were sort of ground zero for some of the culture war stuff and still are, you saw a shift. You saw a distinct move. Now, in terms of the political analysis, the thing, and I don't know if you and I have talked about in this podcast, I've talked about in some others, like it's easy to overstate. People tend to look at the Biden election in 2020 and then the Youngkin election in 2021 and are like, oh my gosh, look at this enormous, 10-point kind of swing. I think the Biden election, Virginia's a state with a lot of military, a lot of civil servants, and a lot of people who take government seriously. And so Biden performed well, and you had a lot of Republicans who voted Democratic at the national level in that election because of Donald Trump was on the ballot, right?
Yep.
And Youngkin did a masterful job keeping Donald Trump out of the race in 2021. And so I think the swing you have to look at is the swing from 2017, the previous gubernatorial election, where Ralph Northam, the Democrat, won, to 2021. And what you do see there is Youngkin made inroads, again, substantial ones across the board. So I don't mean to like take anything away. He won the election, a state that a lot of people thought was out of reach for Republicans, and he did it by putting together a pretty interesting coalition. His coalition was actually much more diverse, I think, than people realize. And so I don't want to take anything away from all that, but it was not this 10-point swing. The national election, the state election are different. You got to look at 2017, and there you do see movement. And again, education, I think, was a big part of it. And to your question, like, look, Randy coming in, it was like a finger in the eye to people who, and the thing you can't forget about this is lots of people were talking in the fall of 2021, like the school closure thing was in the past. Why did anybody care? Kids have been back in school since late that spring and all that. First of all, people were still upset about it. Second, a lot of people are still experiencing it. If you have a kid,
Yeah.
for example, in special ed, and there'd been, there continues to be, one of the school districts in the state is in a compliance agreement now around special ed services. There's a lot of, other issues happening in other divisions. It's a big issue. And so people were still like, this was always talked about in the past tense. It was present tense for a lot of Virginians. And McAuliffe just did not give voice to that. And again, if anything, it was like a stick in the eye, some of this stuff. And there was a price to be paid for that. Now, and look, on the charters and choice, look, Virginia is a tough state on charters. And I would ask you, like, I think it's a fascinating, I run into people and they talk about these states that still don't have charter laws or have really weak ones. And I would characterize Virginia's as very weak. And you hear like, oh, if people there just, had a little more gonus, a little more hustle, like, worked a little harder. And they argue that. And that's certainly one line of argument. But I guess another one you have to ask yourself is maybe the places that don't have charter school laws that are at all or strong don't have them for a reason. Because like the politics there are really brutal. And the governor cannot just wave a magic wand and create charter schools and create more school choice. You have to get through the legislature. And this is always in the media, like it's a left-right thing. It's not. The politics are much more subtle and complicated. And so it's really hard. And so we're doing lab schools, which are these university-affiliated autonomous schools. There's some really cool proposals in the pipeline. I'm excited about that. Michelle Ashton was just appointed to the Board of Education of Virginia. And, so she obviously she's forgotten more about charter schools than most of us know. So we're making steps in that direction, but it is slow going, and it's going to continue to be slow going just because the politics, and in Virginia, there just are not robust parent groups organizing parents right now. The politics do sort of break down, very much establishment driven on this stuff. And until that changes, I don't see the choice situation changing, dramatically. And I wish it would, because I want to see parents in this Commonwealth have more options and choices and more customization for their kids.
Well, I think a lot of this comes down to, in these states that have weak laws or no laws whatsoever, there is just a political calculus that needs to be made on the rural Republican side. Are we really going to exert pressure on these folks or not? Is it going to come from within the Republican Party or not, or from within a political apparatus that is deeply embedded or working, often with Republicans? In Texas, the advocates there saw opposition from rural Republicans on a number of things. Everybody thought that they were going to be supporters of charters. And when we got them to vote in the legislature, 25 of them voted with the opposition. Then the political apparatus was put to work on rural Republicans in Texas, and they flipped back, and we were able to get things passed. In Iowa, governor had the same thing. She tried to get, an aggressive charter school thing done right away, couldn't get it done. Raised her own money, got her own PAC, and said, I'm specifically going to be using this resources to hold accountable my own Republicans who didn't support this thing. She defeated a couple, and the next year she got the law passed. It's really a question of, are people, Republicans usually in these kinds of contexts, willing to do that kind of thing? So I'm really fascinated to see what's going to happen with Youngkin now. I think whatever. I'm not Republicans, but from a charter perspective, right?
You and me both. But unfortunately, they're more vocal on choice these days.
So, but the Republicans were one vote from having control of the Senate as well, which people think would have been enough difference for a charter school bill to get passed. So now the question was, how are they going to get control of the Senate? Now, there was a special election that happened, probably January or February, that was previously held by a Republican senator, and that actually flipped back Democratic.
Yes.
I think people think that might have flipped back because of bad Republican positioning, or positioning that is at odds with voters on abortion. I'm not sure of that. I'd love to see what your thoughts are. But right now we're like
abortion. Although I think, look, I'm not an expert on that race, but I will say two things. One, the Democratic candidate had a very attractive profile It was just a terrific candidate. And then the abortion thing, yeah. I mean, we saw, and we just saw again in Ohio, last week, the abortion thing. I mean, I know I had thought that issue is more baked into the way people voted than it clearly is, and that is an albatross on the Republicans, and it's unclear what they do about it. It's kind of been interesting watching them run to the right in some ways on it. DeSantis, that bill he signed and so forth. I don't know what they're going to do, but it's become clear that the school of thought that Roe was lousy constitutional law, but a good rough approximation of where the country is. That school of thought seems to be correct. Like people, people, they were pretty comfortable with restrictions late term. They did not want restrictions in the first trimester, and Dobbs upended that in a way that's just causing chaos for the Republicans. And I don't know that they have a theory of the case for how they're going to sort of get through that. And per your point, the elections in Virginia, that'll be a major issue this fall. And you ask 5 smart people about politics in Virginia, what's going to happen in the elections in the fall, and you're going to get 5 answers. Status quo seems to be something a lot of people think. So who knows? I don't feel like I have a good enough grasp on it to prognosticate, but I do think you'll see the abortion choice issue will be a big issue. And it is an interesting thing. You can't miss the juxtaposition of the two parties on abortion and choice there and school choice. It is almost like reversed in a very peculiar way.
Yeah. The idea that Dems are out of step with the swing voters on education issues and Republicans are out of step with the swing voters on abortion issues. And how does this play out? It's going to be absolutely fascinating.
Well, more than that though, Jed, right? Like you've got, and I'll probably get in trouble for but the reality is, like, in this country, if you have means, Dobbs, you're going to be able to travel and so forth. Like the people who are really now in a bad situation with Dobbs are, like, if you live in like rural Texas, you don't make a lot of money, you can't take time off from work, you can't travel because you're surrounded by states that have restrictions. That's where you start to. And so, like, when you look at the data on who's going to be affected by this and the estimates and so forth, it's poor women disproportionately. And likewise on school choice, like if you're affluent, you can work around the dysfunction of the system, and you can figure out, people figure out workarounds where they live, or they send their kids to private school. And so or even in a lot of these cities, you can find there are paths, there's clusters of schools and so forth. And if you're affluent, you can figure out how to take advantage of that. If you're poor, you're at the whim of fortune, and so school choice becomes like just an enormous issue for you. And so that juxtaposition also, I just feel like people have to sit with this, and both parties are in weird place, like in terms of like their affinity for helping the poor on a particular issue. It's a very those two issues together are very strange. Rick Hess could probably write a book about it this weekend.
Yeah. Well, I think that in terms of not being a hot steaming mess, I'm not sure what exactly is making the ecosystem viable in Virginia. But we just see in so many other states where either the culture wars are just completely and utterly out of control, or there are some other things. I think
I don't know. I mean, I hear that, but then I'm like, okay, like Tennessee obviously had tons of education culture war stuff, but they still got a new finance plan through that was really pretty good. And that happened, with Bill Lee and with all the stuff that was rolling around culture war wise. I mean, maybe Arkansas will put this to the test because they seem to be leaning in on some of the culture war stuff. And their last legislative session, they passed an ambitious basket of education reform. So maybe they'll put this to the test. Can you sort of walk and chew gum? But I don't know that the culture war stuff in every state has sort of ground. It's just, I think it's different in different states.
Well, I think it'll be interesting to see, not just specifically on the culture war stuff, but when some of these breakthroughs have happened, and I don't think people have necessarily thought them through all in advance very well, and they don't have the system set up on the other side to take care of these things. A story that is going to be bigger and bigger is that those that went to universal vouchers have huge challenges with the administration of their programs. all of the states that estimated how many parents would make use of a universal voucher way underestimated. So Iowa, they have, I don't remember what it is. They have like more than twice as many people who have actually sought the charter. Now, that's going to have a budgetary challenge for the state, for one thing. But the other thing is just administratively, they don't know how to take care of this. Same thing in Arizona. Huge numbers, right? And so they're sending out voucher to programs. And I'm not saying, oh, stop vouchers for this reason. I'm just saying that when you have these kinds of major breakthroughs that happen, if you really, really care about vouchers, you would think that you also are thinking through how are we going to make sure that the administration happens as effectively as possible in the early going, so we don't lose it because of scandal or some other,
right.
issue. And we don't have that
existential crisis, though. It's amazing, like how much people want out, and how when these and like this should be, if you are a public school supporter, and I am a public school supporter, that's why I do a lot of what I do. Like, this is a crisis, and instead, it's just all this bullshit about that we're hearing about what's going on and so forth. And like this, if you believe in public education as sort of a broadly supported cross-class institution, this is like a really perilous moment. And everybody's like whistling past the graveyard. And like you just speaking, so Virginia, on that one, I would not say things are going swimmingly, because like every time the governor points out that like our NAEP scores plummeted because of pandemic policies, biggest drops in the nation, that we have these huge achievement gaps, every time we get a fight over that. Is it really that bad or no? He's ginning up a crisis and all this, and it's insane. You look at the data and you're like, this is an enormous problem for kids. But every time it's a big fight in the media, well, who knows? And you get these stories. Well, maybe it's not so bad. I mean, none of their kids are affected, right? And like that, so that part is not going swimmingly, let me tell you. And I feel like we need, like, where are the groups to like help reset some of that conversation? I mean, the conversation we're basically having in Virginia is a conversation that 15 years ago, the Education Trust would have been at the vanguard of. Like, we're talking about achievement gaps. We're talking about data. We're talking about how do we redo our accreditation system of schools so we can start to actually we don't really have an accountability system in Virginia. So we can start to actually have an accountability system. I mean, that is the conversation. And yet the groups, they are nowhere, none of the groups, and this is not like a critique of the Ed Trust in particular, just none of the groups and the institutions that used to be there anywhere to be found. And
Moms for Liberty driving
are filling that vacuum. And I think that's, and one thing I just want to like come back to before we can talk about Moms for Liberty, because people always seem to like to listen to us talk about them, is you talk about rural charter schools. My kingdom for people just to organize more information about them, take people to them, because it is still, I talk to people all the time, it is an article of faith. You cannot have charter schools in rural communities. And you try to talk to them about like the exciting stuff happening in places like Idaho and so forth. And it's just like, there's just a lack of awareness, and that complicates the already complicated rural politics that you gave voice to earlier.
One of the things that we way underappreciate about rural charter schools is that you need to have different kinds of models to be able to go into those places. And often those models require a different regulatory framework. I would say that one of the strengths of the California charter school law is that we've always had this misnamed, but from a policy perspective, important status of non-classroom based charter schools. Non-classroom based charter schools serve kids, provide less than 80% of their instruction in a classroom setting. So a lot of these schools, the kids go to school 4 days a week, 3 days a week, 2 days a week. There are a lot of classrooms, but they're called non-classroom. But a lot of them end up having these resource centers that serve a relatively small number of kids. 100 kids here, 70 kids over there, 75 kids over here, but they are all in a network and they're all supported with each other. And what happens in rural settings, when you talk about a non-classroom based school coming and setting up a resource center that might serve 60 kids, you're not going to kill off the entire school district.
Right.
And so there's a receptiveness there. Well,
even with the models where kids do have to drive, I'm struck how far, and you see this in urban areas. Like, you'll talk to kids and they're like, oh yeah, I'd have to take the train here and I'm on it for, an hour and 15, hour and a half. Their parents though, like, and I think this is where people in the system think like a system, and they're like, oh, no one would want to do that. It's like, no, if things aren't working well for your kid, you will put them on a bus for an hour.
Yeah.
You will do anything you can to get your kid into a better situation, whether that's because they're having issues at the school, socially, whether that's because they're not being challenged, the school's not working for them, they're just not learning anything, whatever it is. Parents will like do a lot. And if you care about public schools, you should be thinking about, okay, how do we meet those parents where they are, instead of like asking them to take on these heroic, journeys, if you will, for their kids every day or 5 days a week.
And I think that this non-classroom based concept, which I think, allows parents to do things without the same degree of driving and heroism, is missing in most of the country. And so I'm tipping a hand here. I've really worked within the non-classroom based community in California. Will someone please write something saying we need something like this across the whole country? It's amazing. I talked to Oklahoma. They really want this right now. They don't have it. Texas is just getting it. Louisiana hasn't had it. A lot of other places don't have it. And then they have these problems with rural schools. I really think this is a foundational thing. If we got it into the landscape, if we got it into Virginia, I think it would change the discussion in rural settings.
Yeah, no, I like that. And maybe there is like, that's, I mean, we can pretend, we can play assignment editors. We can pretend we're not, we play one on TV. They're like, cause that would be a great, and just looking at rural charters in general. And I mean, there's just like a lot of myth busting that can be done there. But you want to talk about Moms for Liberty? I read 2 articles since I last saw you. Robert like they met up there in Philadelphia, and Robert Pondicio and all the presidential candidates, real cattle call.
Yeah,
a lot of attention.
Great article. Thank you for sending that to me. I
thought it was interesting. There's two big things that I saw. I'm sure there was lots of other stuff written about it, but the 2 that I saw that came across my desk were Pondicio's piece, which was certainly friendly to them. And then there was a Daily Beast piece. We can put both these in the show notes. That was decidedly less friendly, and I thought they were kind of an interesting juxtaposition. Robert's piece, we could talk about his comparison with TFA, was interesting. I think that's I liked that part. That's worth discussing. But I think he was, exceptionally friendly to them. The Daily Beast was exceptionally harsh. And I think a lot of people might think, wow, the truth probably lies like somewhere in between. I'm not saying Robert was untruthful. I just think his take was rosier and more favorable than mine would be. And I just thought it was interesting, and it's sort of, we got some feedback last time we talked about Moms for Liberty. Some people were like, thanks for being nuanced, but some people were like, oh my God, how can you like say anything at all good about them? And it struck me, that's kind of like the times we're in, right? Like there's just not that sort of, that sort of gray is really hard to get at.
Well, I thought the article was interesting for a lot of reasons, but I particularly focused in on the conflict between the National Parents Union and Moms for Liberty, and they're supposedly on opposite sides and they're talking trash about each other and all of that. Okay, great. But if you look at the data that they're getting through their surveying, they are finding that parents and general voters are just completely and utterly fed up with public education. It's going back to the point that you just made earlier about the level of crisis that we have. NPU, I know they have some new data coming out. It may have come out this week, I'm not sure, talking about parents recognizing, I don't remember the exact numbers, it's strikingly high, in the high 60s or something like that, believing that there is a crisis in public education. And then interestingly, on the NPU side, they also identified improving public education as the second most important issue to voters, which is something we just don't see very often. So they're coming at it from very different standpoints. And there may be aspects of what both of them are doing that we don't like, but they're both tapping into something that feels very foundational and very true.
Yeah, I think so. And maybe it's so hot. And a lot of that, I watched a lot of that back and forth. And it's like, that just strikes me that's a lot of that's adult politics. I have trouble seeing the through line to kids, just in the whole back and forth with both of them. But like, there's more agreement out there on a lot of this stuff. And in some ways, maybe that makes the debate hotter, right? I mean, you and I talked about this, like Moms for Liberty, their position, like, schools shouldn't be concealing transitions of kids from their parents. Like that's like a very popular position in this country, like 80%. And I think the Democrats are starting to realize that they're way over their skis on that one. But so is treat every kid with respect and dignity, and try to have inclusion and tolerance. That's where people are. There's a hardcore group that's not there, but they're small, thankfully. We've made a lot of progress in this country. And you can go down the issues, whether it's sexual content in books, whether it's just a host of these issues. There's actually you look, there's just tons of common ground, and we'll put in the show notes. We wrote a report called Common Ground that has lots of this data, but like there really is. You just look, like people don't need convincing that there's a problem with race and racism in America and historically, but you get this hardcore group on both sides, like one side saying nobody actually believes that, and the other side, saying it's not a thing. But those are the margins. Like most Americans are there, and it's issue after issue. And so a little bit that may add to the heat, because there's fundamentally so much less disagreement there than people would think when you get outside the advocates. And so they're vying for, these different groups are vying for slices of sort of elite coalitions and elite attention. And it's kind of divorced from what's actually going on in terms of how people are living their lives.
One thing that we can return to in the future, I'd really love to pick your brain on this, given that we have this level of, I've been calling this the great disconnect. I saw this, several years back, just that the overlap between what public education was offering and the bare minimum that parents would accept was becoming smaller and smaller, such that there would be maybe no overlap whatsoever. And I think that's what we're coming into, and just many parents just leaving, right? Well,
the pandemic, I think, we can talk about this another time. The pandemic did, like, there's a thing called path dependency. You talk about in political science. So when things are basically on a path, they tend to proceed on that path until they're disrupted. And the pandemic disrupted. There's a lot of path dependency. People are like, oh, it might be nice to have a different school or do something different, but like, this is how our life is structured. This is what we do. This is the school. And the pandemic opened up like a lot of possibilities for a lot of people, particularly people with means. There's a obvious class overlay to this whole thing. And I think we're seeing the effects of that in people's, like, you can be more dissatisfied now. You can actually act on that. And I don't think the public school establishment has come to terms with that. They're still telling themselves these happy stories. They're picking these fights on other stuff. And I don't think they I don't think they've actually really come to terms with what a perilous moment it is.
And for people like ourselves who have pretty much anchored ourselves in our entire professional life around the support of public education, and there's some place beyond publicness that we just don't go, vouchers, I think is going to be something we're going to have to revisit, because this is just happening now. And if we want to say that we're interested in public education, but we have nothing to say about how vouchers and private, quote unquote, private education happens, we're just basically going to write ourselves out of the conversation for generations to come. This is the direction that things are going. And there are ways that these programs can be set up to be more or less public. The thumb on the scale of the kids who need better education more than others. And we can either just wash our hands of it. And if we do, I think that will mean that these programs will evolve to be less supportive of kids who need it most, right?
Yeah.
If we involve ourselves, I think, can make sure that these things actually become a positive thing. But our voice is going to be needed for that kind of positive thing to happen.
Yeah, we need pragmatism, right? You remember when, remember back in like 2000, Al Gore called himself a pragmatic idealist, and he got a load of crap because that guy could never catch a break. But it's actually it's a great formulation. Like, you want to, we should maintain our ideals and our idealism around this stuff, but you also need to be pragmatic. And you are totally right. Like where we are, we need to meet people where they are, and to the extent we don't, public education is going to lose a lot of its supporters, and the system still seems, just really fixed on trying to alienate people and annoy them with just a host of policies that complicate what people want, how they want to live their lives, and what they expect. And I just think it's incredibly ill-timed right now with everything going on. And we didn't even get to like learning loss. You've got this like enormous, backdrop of just catastrophe for a lot of kids that people are also not sort of squarely looking at.
For sure. Well, lots of stuff to keep talking about.
Yeah.
We'll be back together in a couple of weeks for our mystery guests.
And there we can really get into our mystery guests are going to like tee us up to really get into some of these questions around parental empowerment and what's going on in some of these different groups. So their take on all this will be, I think they will bring interesting perspectives, and it'll be fascinating.
And so then we'll either take a hiatus or, I'll join you from halfway through the Camino for what.
Yeah, no, I'm going to want to hear about that. We may need to just do a special one on that. What an amazing experience. I'm so happy that you all can do that. In 25 years, that's great. That's a huge accomplishment.
Well, we're excited to be doing it. And just delighted to have this chance to do this stuff with you, Andy. So I look forward to continuing and look forward to seeing you again in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I will too, Jed. I'll see you in 2 weeks. It was great to see you.
Okay. Take care.
See ya.